The town of Oakhaven was a place of simple joys. Days were long and sun-drenched. Kids rode bikes down dusty lanes. Neighbours knew each other's names. It was in this idyllic setting that Jake and George, inseparable since kindergarten, shared countless adventures. Jake was the bolder of the two. He was always the first to climb the tallest tree, the first to dive into the swimming hole. George was quieter, more thoughtful. He preferred reading to roughhousing, sketching to sports. Despite their differences, their bond was unbreakable. They spent their days exploring the nearby woods, building forts, and dreaming of the future. They promised to always be there for each other, no matter what. The mansion loomed over Oakhaven from its hilltop perch. The old house seemed to watch the town with vacant eyes. Its windows, like darkened eyes, stared blankly down. Locals told eerie tales of the mansion. They spoke of the original owner, a wealthy recluse who vanished without a trace. Some whispered of ghostly apparitions, flickering lights and disembodied voices echoing in the dead of night. Most kids avoided the place. It was a place of whispers and shadows, not Jake and George. They were intrigued by the mysteries surrounding the mansion. They made a pact to explore its forgotten rooms and uncover its secrets. Little did they know, their childhood curiosity would plunge them into a terrifying reality. The mansion was more than just an old house with dusty secrets. It was a vessel of darkness, waiting to ensnare the unsuspecting. And George, drawn to its enigma, was about to become its next victim. At first, George was excited about inheriting the mansion. He saw it as a blank canvas, a place where he could unleash his creativity. He spent hours exploring its dusty attic, sketching its shadowy hallways and researching its history. But the mansion began to consume him. George grew increasingly withdrawn. He stopped joining Jake for their usual adventures, preferring instead the company of the shadows within the mansion walls. His once vibrant sketches became dark and disturbing. They depicted grotesque figures and twisted landscapes. He was haunted by nightmares, vivid and terrifying, of being chased through the mansion's endless corridors. Jake noticed the change in his friend. George was distant, his eyes holding a haunted look. He tried to reach out, to pull George back from the precipice he seemed to be teetering on. But George pushed him away. He insisted he was fine, that he just needed some time alone. But Jake knew deep down that something was terribly wrong. Days turned into weeks. George's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He talked to himself in hushed whispers. He claimed to see things others couldn't. He barely slept, his eyes constantly drawn back to the mansion on the hill. Jake couldn't stand by and watch his friends slip away. He decided to confront George. He knew it wouldn't be easy. George had become increasingly hostile towards any mention of leaving the mansion. One overcast afternoon, Jake marched up the hill to the mansion. The old house seemed to emanate an oppressive aura. He could feel a weight settle on his chest, making it hard to breathe. He knocked on the weathered oak door. Silence. He knocked again, louder this time. Still no answer, but he could hear muffled noises coming from inside. Whispers, scraping sounds, and something that sounded disturbingly like laughter. He tried the doorknob. To his surprise, it was unlocked. Taking a deep breath, Jake stepped inside. The air inside the mansion was heavy with the scent of decay and something faintly metallic. It sent a shiver down Jake's spine. Dust motes danced in the faint rays of sunlight filtering through grimy windows. "George!" Jake called out, his voice echoing eerily in the stillness. "George, where are you?" There was no answer, only the sound of his own breathing and the soft whisper of the wind whistling through cracks in the walls. He could almost imagine it was the house itself whispering back to him. He started with the main floor, moving from room to room, each one seemingly colder and darker than the last. Cobwebs clung to every surface, and the air was thick with the oppressive weight of neglect. As he ventured deeper into the mansion, he began to hear the whispers again. They seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, whispering his name, chilling him to the bone. They spoke of fear, of despair, of being trapped forever within the mansion's cold embrace. He tried to convince himself it was just the wind playing tricks on him, but deep down he knew it was something more, something sinister. Jake finally found George in the mansion's old library. He sat hunched over a massive, leather-bound book, his face illuminated by the flickering light of a single candle. The room was in disarray. Books scattered across the floor, furniture overturned. "George!" Jake exclaimed, relieved to have found his friend. "What's going on? What's happened here?" George slowly looked up. His eyes, once filled with warmth and laughter, were now cold and distant. His features seemed sharper, his skin paler than before. He looked as if he hadn't slept in days. "You shouldn't be here, Jake," he hissed, his voice barely a whisper. "This place, it's not safe." Jake tried to reason with his friend, but it was no use. George was gone, lost to whatever darkness had taken root within the mansion walls. He lunged at Jake, his eyes blazing with fury. Jake stumbled back, horrified by the transformation he was witnessing. His best friend was gone. Replaced by something twisted and malevolent, he was trapped. Panic surged through Jake. He scrambled back, tripping over a pile of discarded books. George advanced towards him, his hands outstretched, his fingers contorted into claws. "Leave this place, Jake," George snarled, his voice guttural and distorted. "Leave and never come back!" Just when Jake thought all hope was lost, he remembered the amulet. His grandmother had given it to him years ago, a small silver pendant etched with a strange symbol. "It will protect you from harm," she'd whispered, her voice raspy with age. "But use it wisely, child. It is a powerful object." He fumbled with the chain around his neck, his fingers trembling. He finally managed to clasp the pendant and held it up towards George. The amulet pulsed with a warm light, bathing the room in an ethereal glow. George shrieked, throwing his hands up to shield his eyes. He staggered back, hissing in pain as the light washed over him. The shadows in the room seemed to recoil from the amulet's radiance. "What is this power?" George rasped, his voice filled with fear and loathing. Jake pressed his advantage, holding the amulet aloft. He advanced towards George, his voice firm despite the fear coursing through him. "This ends now, George. Whatever's gotten hold of you, I'm not letting it win." The light emanating from the amulet intensified, forcing George to his knees. He writhed in agony, clutching his head as if in unbearable pain. The shadows that clung to him flickered and receded, driven back by the amulet's power. "Get out! Get out!" George screamed, his voice echoing through the library. "It's too late for me! Save yourself!" But Jake refused to leave his friend behind. He continued to press forward, the amulet's light burning away the darkness that had enveloped George. He could see a flicker of recognition in George's eyes, a glimmer of the friend he once knew. Finally, with a deafening roar, the darkness was vanquished. George collapsed to the floor, trembling and exhausted. The shadows receded back into the walls, leaving behind an eerie silence. The mansion itself seemed to sigh, as if relieved of a heavy burden. Jake rushed to his friend's side, relief washing over him. George was weak, his breathing shallow, but he was alive. The darkness that had possessed him was gone, driven back to whatever abyss it had come from. They left the mansion, leaving behind the shadows and whispers that haunted its halls. Neither of them spoke as they walked back down the hill towards the town, the setting sun casting long shadows behind them. George eventually recovered, but he was forever changed by his experience. The once vibrant and carefree boy was gone, replaced by someone more reserved, more introspective. The darkness he had encountered had left an indelible mark on his soul. Their friendship, though tested, endured. They had faced the darkness together, and in doing so, their bond had been forged anew. They knew that no matter what life threw their way, they would always have each other's back. They had learned that even in the darkest of times, friendship, courage, and a little bit of hope could conquer all.